Fire Girl, Chapter 6. As we headed back to the shop, I had more to worry about than Auntie Lida wringing the magic out of the unbelievable day. It was almost dark, and whatever I told her, it was going to be good. Faiza and I strategized while we removed our fine feathers in the deserted alley, shook them out, and folded them as neatly as we could. When I walked in, Auntie had the exact expression on her face that I had expected, but it softened much more quickly than usual. Clearly, she too was still on a high from the unbelievable day. That gave me some courage. Attack was the best form of defense, I told myself. So before she could utter a word, I exclaimed, "Oh, Auntie, you won't believe what happened." "What?" she asked, alarmed. I felt a pang of guilt, but I could not chicken out now. I saw Gifty watching me with a smirk and gave thanks that Auntie had a bag to her. "This customer came to the shop and selected some things," I began. Auntie nodded expectantly. Then, when it was time to pay, she looked in her bag and looked in her bag, I continued, drawing out the story to steady my nerves, but she couldn't find her purse. Auntie hissed through her teeth. They should better find their purses before they opened the door. She told me it must have dropped in the car, and she would give me the money if I came with her to the car. "And you did?" Auntie battered in sharply. She begged me, Auntie. I didn't know what to do, but I had an uncomfortable feeling about the whole thing. So although the things were not many, I took Faiza with me, just in case. Behind Auntie, Gifty was shaking her head slowly. I tried to blur her out of my vision. The woman said her car was far away. Because she had not been able to find a parking place, we walked and walked, sweating in the sun, till we had left the market behind. Then, when we were on the quiet street, she tried to grab the things without giving us any money. "I knew it," said Auntie Lydia. "She was just a thief, and you fell for it." "Auntie, please, I'm sorry," I said, hanging my head. Auntie shook her head in exasperation. She thought because you were children, she could take advantage of you. But Faiza didn't let her get away with it, I announced, pecking up. She held onto the bowl, and the things fell on the ground. She raised alarm and the woman got scared and ran away. "So where are the things?" Auntie asked. I opened the door and beckoned Faiza in. She greeted Auntie timidly and lowered her bowl. "They got a little dusty, but we took them out and here they are," I said, scooping out the remnants of a magical day and placing them on the counter, where they turned back into impersonal bits of shop merchandise. If Auntie had not had such a good day herself, she might have been skeptical. But with the goods returned and everyone safely back, she had little motivation to make a fuss. A stern look from me in Gifty's direction, while Auntie inspected the goods, made her turn away and busy herself with packing up for the day, so that her face would be safe from Auntie's scrutiny. I would have to be nicer than ever to her now, a prospect I did not relish. The next morning, I was able to get away to have breakfast with Faiza and to savor our adventure. Gifty gave me a sour look when I got back into the shop. She did not know exactly what we had got up to the day before, but she knew we had had fun together and she resented it. One thing she was not smirking about though was that the TV was on the blink. Missing even one episode of a telenovela was a definition of a crisis in life. No wonder the machine had conked out. If Auntie could see the way she sometimes ignored customers or made them to shout above the love declaration of the smearing characters and the tenderest melodrama of the Ghanaian and Nigerian films, she would have disconnected the box herself. But now, she gave in to Gifty's nagging and called Mr. Blankston on the phone. "I'm so busy, Wafa." She peered into her cell phone, absently fingering the seam of her wave on. "I beg, can't you just send one of your boys to pick it up?" "What? One of your boys?" I sat bolted upright in front of the laptop where I was checking Auntie's mail for her. Calm down, I told myself. Mr. Blanton has several young men in his shop. It was more likely to be an apprentice in pungent overalls than Mr. Fresh and Spicy, but I could not stop my heart racing. I was both wrong and right because it was not an apprentice, but it was not him either. It was his brother Peter, Stephen. As he stepped into the shop, I wondered where Pfizer was. I looked down hurriedly, pretending to be absorbed in the computer. I could not afford any revealing exclamation with Auntie around. She was busy adding something up on a calculator. Abena, help him take it off the stand, she called without looking up. I was much taller than Gifty, and the TV was pegged at a precarious angle overhead. She did not want any accident. I felt an impossible combination of dread and delight. Gifty was perturbed because she had been checking Stephen out from the moment he entered the shop. No one needed to tell me that he was shortly to be starring in her kissing fantasies. That would keep her going till the TV was back, I thought, weirdly. She crowded around us, pretending to make herself useful. Heaven knew how. As we lifted the TV off the stand, Stephen gave a little gasp and the machine tipped in my direction. You, he said, as I heaved toward him. You are there. Shh, I interrupted. My auntie doesn't like me talking to boys. I get it, he said, steadying the machine. No worries. His smile reminded me of another. Gifty looked from him to me. Just one thing though, he whispered, leaning over the TV. Where's your friend? Gifty's face froze. Oh, her, she's around. Around? Yeah, not too far away actually. So, she comes to the market often? He asked. Sure, to do her shopping and stuff. Yeah, she looked like a classy lady. He grinned. What's her name? Gifty was not even trying to close her mouth now. Her name? Oh, it's Abna. Why are you people taking so long over that TV? Auntie called out. You are disturbing the customers. Hurry up. I gave Stephen a see what I mean look, and he responded with a sympathetic, now wow look. We are done, Mommy. He picked up, wrapping the cord around the TV and walking out with it under his arm. Gifty tried to catch his eyes as he hesitated, but he did not notice her. Instead, he gave me a wink as I closed the door behind him. It was an unfinished business sort of wink. I did not look back at Gifty. Instead, I asked Auntie if I could pop out to buy a snack because I was getting hungry. I was out the door before she could respond. I had to see Pfizer. She came up as soon as I stepped outside. Did you? I began. Oh yes, I saw him. She cut in. I studied her expression, but as always, she was so in command of herself that I could not guess what she was feeling. There was something about her quietness though. I was not sure what to ask next. She saved me the trouble. He walked right past me, both on the way in and on the way out. Didn't he see you? I grasped. Of course not, she replied. Oh, you mean he was looking the other way? I said with some relief. Oh no, he was looking at me all right. But you see, Abna, looking and seeing are two different things. Oh, I said, my face crumpling. I felt like crying, just thinking what that must have felt like for Pfizer. It's okay, she said. You can't blame him. I could not believe her calmness and her maturity. I looked at her with new respect as she continued. How can you possibly expect him to make a connection between the princess he saw yesterday and some kaya standing around in the market? The princess? I thought, hearing an echo in my mind. We will never give you our princess. She is too good for you. I didn't know why I remembered this. It seems so inappropriate right now. and yet, at the same time, it was resonating in my mind. And he was asking of you, I said miserably, inside the shop. Was he? She asked eagerly, letting her guard down for a moment. So then, he recognized you. Yes, he did, I said. She did not seem bitter, and looking at her silent resignation, it suddenly fell into place for me how logical it was. Of course, he could recognize me, the educated, privileged girl who might have been back from a wedding or outdooring with her buddy yesterday and browsing the boutiques before going to her auntie's shop. But how could the gorgeous girl at my side possibly be an illiterate Kayayo from a village he could not have pronounced in a remote area he could never go? I felt all the glow of the day before and the morning after evaporate like dew in a merciless sun. He recognized me when we were taking down the TV. I said in a somber tone how different this was from how I imagined telling it to her, and yet what I had expected, I now asked myself. I tried to shush him so Auntie wouldn't hear, and I looked into her eyes with all the sorrow I was feeling. The one thing he wanted to know was where you were, and she smiled her Pfizer smile. How could she? If I were her, I would be howling by now. It was not that I had not known it before, but at that moment, the enormity of the gulf between us struck me with dizzying force. Here she was, accepting what she could not have with grace, taking the little she could have and appreciating it, while I felt entitled to reprimand the world for not giving me everything I wanted, including now, happiness for and on behalf of my friend. She took my hand as if I were the one in need of consoling. It's okay, Abna. Cheer up. I'm fine. Really, I am. Oh, Pfizer, you're so brave, so strong, I said quietly. I envy you. You envy me? She said, and once again, I heard an echo of a past conversation between us. You never finished telling me your story, you know, I said reminiscently. That's true, she responded. My story in Asanes. Why don't I continue now? She asked, putting her arm around me with the look of a mother soothing her fretting baby. I nodded. The Kaya Girl, Chapter 7. The night before the wedding, when I caught Asana staring at the knife, that was the night everything changed, she began. I sat back, feeling the pleasant mix of comfort and suspense that a child will feel on hearing once upon a time. And not only for Asana, for me too, she continued. The two of us had to hurry and decide everything before Auntie Fatima got home. Oh yes, she had gone to borrow the jewelry from her sister, hadn't she? I recalled aloud. Yes, Faiza said, and she could be home any moment. Asana whispered to me, her face coming back to life. I want to be on that bus at dawn. You will, my sister, I promised her. I had no idea how I was going to do it, but I was more sure about that than I had ever been about anything else in my life. I was going to get her on that bus. We whispered together until Auntie came back, humming to herself and displaying her booty of gold and beads. She had drunk some beer at her sister's house in early celebration, so she was jovial and a little drowsy. I had seen Auntie drink beer before, and I knew when she got the chance, it would not just be one bottle. I was jubilant. She would sleep well. I, on the other hand, chewed cola that night. I hated it. It was the bitterest thing I knew, and I'd never understood why it was so popular. But I knew that it kept people awake, and that was what I needed to be. Asana and I slept on the mat on the floor, on the other side of the raffia screen that gave Auntie some privacy in her bed. Asana did not chew cola, but she lay there unblinking, while I swirled the mash of cola around my mouth, musing that the bitterness alone was enough to keep one awake. Auntie Fatima snored for a couple of hours, but I needed her to stop. I knew her sleeping patterns, and the snoring stage was when she could easily wake up. When she stopped snoring and her mouth hung helplessly opened, saliva trickling out of its corner, that was when she could sleep through a hurricane. At last, I heard the blessed sound of silence. I walked upright to her. I even dared to light a small stump of candle, which I placed inside a small tin to dim the light. So she was gone all right. The beer scent still hovered above her, and I turned away, nauseated, and yet feeling a tug at my heart for her, and for what she would face tomorrow. Asana was sitting upright on the mat. It was time. I beckoned her over. I was going to need help. We went over to the table that held Auntie's stacks of pots and pans. Auntie always tied her money inside her wrapper cloth, but her bank, which she only opened once a week, that was somewhere else. Even Asana did not know where that was, because her mother was so secretive about it. I lifted the smallest pan from the tallest stake. Its enamel finish was a warm cream color, with fluffy petal blue, red, and yellow flowers painted on either side of the edge in silver. I handed it over to Asana, who spread her wrapped cloth on the floor and placed the pot gently on the top of it, cushioning any clinking it might make. By the time she turned back to me, I was holding the second pot. She took this and placed it next to its smallest twin, and then folded the cloth against the inverted lid of the larger pot, picked up the smaller one, and placed it deliberately on top. She repeated this each time I handed her a larger pot, lifting the stake with a greater and greater care as it rose higher and higher. I, for my part, had to be extremely careful not to knock down any of the other surrounding stakes while working at the table. After 5 pots, Asana needed me not only to help her lift the new stake without it toppling over, but also to lend my own wrapper cloth to continue the wrapping and cushioning process. Against the daily hubbub of the village, Auntie could easily unstake and restake this pot without anyone noticing, but in this still night air, the smallest clink was audible. It might not wake her, but one never knew who else might be awake or wandering around outside. And although we were only communicating with sign language, I knew that in our heads we were both hearing the cacophony that will arouse the whole village if one false move brought these stairs crashing down. We handled Auntie's precious paws like raw eggs, working in a slow motion of soundless, nameless dread. For much as our every impulse was to rush and flee, we knew that a single careless slip could cost us everything. At last, the 10th pot, a mammoth vessel, was exposed. I lifted its lid into the air, and there, wrapped in a headscarf at the bottom, was Auntie Fati's bank. If we were lucky, she would not be visiting it for some days. Still holding the large timber-like lid in my left hand, I wondered how much Asana would need to make it to Accra. Accra, I thought incredulously. Imagine that my very own sister, cousin, might be there the next day if we pulled this off. I wondered what the huge city was like. The biggest I'd ever seen in my life was Tolong, not even Tamale. I dared not take too much note for fear of making the theft too noticeable. After all, I was not going anywhere myself and would be there to face the music. The hoot of an owl nearby made us both jump, and I nearly dropped the huge lid. I looked at Asana urgently. It was no owl, it was Rakia. She was good at that sound, and it was the signal we had agreed upon. I had told them that I would be coming with them because I knew she and the other girls would be too alarmed by the prospect of the bride joining their fugitive group. After all, they were relying on the festivities as a smokescreen for their departure. But once they were on the point of leaving, an argument would create too much of a disturbance, so I was counting on the urgency of the moment for Asana's acceptance. Tremblingly, I set down the H-pot lid and grabbed the wad of notes. I peeled off some few, not even seeing their denomination in the dimness, or having any idea if what I was taking was far too little or too much. We were simply out of time. I thrust the small roll into Asana's hand embraced her, and turned towards the door. She turned back to grab the little bag she had prepared from its hiding place, and then pointed anxiously at the pods. I gestured back. "Don't worry, I'll deal with them," and pushed her through the door. Rekia and the other girls were crouched in the bush outside, signaling their haste. They would not even see that it wasn't me. Asana turned and hugged again for the last time. Then I watched her run over to the others, and together, without losing any moment, they ran away. Yes, I cheered. "So did they get away?" I asked Faiza. "Yes, indeed," she replied. "They made it, at least. I assumed they did because that was the last time I ever saw them." "Your cousin? Your sister Asana? You haven't seen her since?" I asked. "No," Faiza said, and this time there was real sorrow in her voice. "I've looked, but I haven't found her." "You've looked?" I echoed. "Where?" "Here," she replied. "Here in Accra, in this very Makola market." "Oh, so that's why..." She nodded. "Yes, that's why I came. That's why I'm here." "And your auntie let you go?" I asked. She nodded. "Auntie was never the same after Asana left." "Poor thing," I said. "What was it like when they found out she was gone?" "Well, the next morning, we were awoken by the sound of singing. Luckily, I'd fallen into a deep sleep by then. I would not have believed I could sleep awake on such a night, but on the work of putting all those pots back on my own, and the relief that she had got away just knocked me out. So when the singing woman arrived, I woke at the same time as Auntie Faiza, in genuine confusion, which luckily for me was taken for shock at Asana's absence from the mat next to mine. It took a few seconds to remember everything, and by the time the sweet memory of a flight hit me, I was alert enough to hide it. I jumped out from my mat in alarm, pretending to look for Asana in the corners of the room. The woman had come to fetch the bride, to take her for bathing, and for the rites that needed to be performed on this special morning. Some ran outside to look for her, while Auntie Faiza clenched her stomach and hurried outside too. Her bowels always reacted first to bad news. It was decided that some of the women would walk to the stream to find out if Asana had gone there to bath herself or fetch water. This postponed the evil moment for a bit, but a sense of dread was upon everyone. By the time they were back from the stream, shaking their heads, there was more hubbub in the village, as the absence of some other girls had also been discovered. People were beginning to suspect what had happened. It was not the first time a band of girls had run away, but no one wanted to be the first to suggest it, not when Alhaji's bride must be one of the group. Auntie was hysterical, tearing after her clothing like a mad woman, and dripping off her headscarf to expose the short grey hair that hardly anyone ever saw. Her sister was sent for and came running to console her. I was asked to prepare some porridge for her, which I gladly did, anxious to avoid questions, but I need not have worried. She was too distraught to do anything but weep and hyperventilate. She and her sister stayed in the room all day, while Uncle went off to Alhaji's compound to face the music. I heard that he prostrated himself before Alhaji Brown Teeth, begging for forgiveness. Later that day, we saw a police car enter the village. Uncle ran and hid in the bushes. 2 policemen from the station at Tolong went to Alhaji's compound. I heard he paid them good money and told them to go and find Faiza. Uncle did not venture back home till well after dark, but Auntie hardly noticed. I wondered what upset her more, the loss of her daughter or the loss of her new status as mother of the bride and mother-in-law to the most powerful man in the village. Later on, I felt I had done her an injustice though, because she never said anything about the missing money. I knew my aunt well enough to know that she would never have overlooked even a single missing note. The fact that she said nothing suggested to me that she must have had her own thoughts about how they had gone missing. And perhaps she was not inclined to make a fuss about the loss of money that might have given her daughter a safe passage to wherever she had fled. I wondered if she puzzled over exactly who had taken it, but if she suspected me, she would have showed it. After all, she knew how close Asana and I were, and if that money had been used for Asana, then it did not really make any difference who had done the taking. Sometimes, I even thought that there must be a part of her that was secretly relieved that her daughter had been spared a marriage she had dreaded so much. 2 years passed, and we thought we might see some of the missing girls back from the groundnut harvest, and if not see them in our village, then, at least, hear that they had been to nearby villages. But this never happened. I suspected that, with the inclusion of Asada in the group, they judged it too risky to return after a few couple of years. No one wanted to face the wrath of Alhaji Brown Teeth, despite the fact that he had chosen a replacement bride within a month, frustrated by the incompetence of the district police. The girl had already produced a child, and whenever I saw her, I gave silent thanks to Allah on behalf of Asana, but at the same time, implored him to keep her safe wherever she was. And that was something I wondered about every day. One day, a little girl arrived in our household. She was about 7 years old and a daughter of one of Auntie's other brothers. That made her my cousin, but I had never met her before. She was older than I had been when I was given to Auntie. She cried a lot at the beginning because she missed her home, but I tried to comfort her and joke with her, and after a couple of months, she was well settled and had learnt a lot from me about the household chores she had to do. I waited for another month and then asked Auntie if I could go and look for Asana. "Where will you look for her?" "Where will you look?" she asked me. "In the big city markets," I said. "You know all the girls who ran away go there." "Faiza, do you know where my daughter is?" Auntie asked me, looking into my eyes. It was the first time she had asked me about it directly. I was relieved to be able to answer truthfully. "No, Auntie Fatima, I do not." She dropped her eyes and I continued. "I miss her too, Auntie. Please, let me go and look for her. I can do it." Rakia had told me that they would see how far their money took them. They were hoping to get as far as Accra, but they could not be sure, and I had no idea if they had been able to do it. "Let me go to Accra, Auntie," I begged. She was motionless for a while, as if she had not heard me, and then she nodded heavily. "You are growing too now, Faiza," she said. "You can also work and earn some money while you are there. You may go." She even gave me money for the lorry fare to Accra. "And here you are," I said, looking at Faiza with new comprehension. "Yes, here I am, but I have not been successful in my mission." "Not yet," I said, "but don't give up." "Well, I'm not trying to," she said, "but I really don't think she's here, you know, Abna." "How can you be sure?" I asked her. "Mokola is a huge market, one of the biggest in Africa." "I know," she said, "but we have our own networks here. I have met other girls I know here, other girls from my village, and they haven't seen or heard anything of her. Even some of the food sellers we have been going to, they are my people too, but they've not heard of any girl like her working in Mokola." "So what are you going to do?" I asked. "Well," she looked directly at me. "I'm almost ready to move on, Abna," she said quietly. "What?" I asked in dismay. "You are leaving?" I was devastated. I had been so caught up in this little world of our friendship that I had not really thought about the fact that it must come to an end. And not just because Faiza might be leaving, but because my summer vacation was almost over. "Where will you go?" I asked her. "To Kumasi," she said. "KGTR Market. That one is even bigger than Mokola, I have heard." "Yes, I've heard that too, I said. Most of our girls come either to Mokola or Kijitia, so if she's not in Mokola, then that is the next place I must look. And what if she's not there either? I asked. I mean, she might have moved on, got some other work, even got married. Well, I can only try. That is what I promised Auntie, said Faiza. So if you don't succeed, will you come back here? I asked anxiously. I also promised Auntie I will come back home if I didn't find her, she said, looking down. So that is what I must do. I looked down too. Then I continued, Faiza, aren't you scared of moving from one big city to the next like that? Do you know anyone or have any place to stay over there? No, she shook her head. But I was scared here in the beginning too, and it all worked out. This friend of mine, I thought yet again, so small but so strong. Abena, I want to thank you, she said, turning towards me. We were sitting on our usual spot outside the shop. Do you remember the day when we first met? I nodded. Well, from the first day you smiled at me and helped me lift my bowl, I felt at home in this great, big, scary Makola market. Me too, I said, impulsively. It's strange, but that was the moment I really started feeling at home here. Auntie was here, and Gifty was here, but still, I felt lonely until I met you, Faiza. We hugged each other to say thank you and other things that were harder to express, like how much a Kayayo from the north and a doctor's daughter from the south had come to mean to each other in the space of 2 months. You know, she said, as we pulled back, I would probably have left already if it wasn't for you. Really? I said. Yes, she replied. Remember when Asana told me I was like a twin sister comeback? I nodded. Well, you can never replace a dear person in your life, she continued, but the pain of losing them can diminish when other dear ones come into your life. And in the same way, you helped me get over the pain of losing Asana. I didn't know what to say to that, but I felt honored. I know your school vacation is almost over, Abena, she continued. That is why I'm also getting ready to leave. Will I ever see you again? I asked. I felt a sort of helplessness. My school friends and I met on internet chats and exchanged phone calls and text messages, even after we had spent a whole day at school together and will spend the whole day of the next day together. But here I was, faced with a friend who could not use any of those things, did not own any of those things, and could not even write me a letter with pen and paper or have a P.O. box which I could send her one. How could we live in such different worlds inside the same country? I wondered. I had tried to teach Faiza some reading and writing, and she had done well, but we had not had much time and were still at the early stages. It would take many more lessons for her to be able to write a letter. Although she had been very interested in learning to read and write, she had always been fascinated to learn more about the world around her. And we had spent time talking about things I had learned in history and geography and science lessons, as well as things I had learned through the television and films, especially the cable channels. I never thought of myself as a teacher and had never considered those subjects to be so interesting. They were just part of school, very old school. But now, I realize how disconnected and how shut out one could be from so much of the world without that knowledge. It's not yet time to say goodbye, Faiza interrupted my thoughts, not quite answering my question, but it was time to let you know. At that moment, Auntie came out of the shop. I should have known you would be here chatting with your friend, she said. To my surprise, she looked at Faiza with something almost approaching warmth and said, Your friend is soon going back to school, Faiza. I'm sure you'll miss her. Faiza nodded silently. But just because she is not here doesn't mean you can't continue caring for my customers, okay? And she actually smiled at her. I couldn't believe my eyes on my ears. She turned to me. I'm going to buy something, so go back and help Gifty in the shop. she said. Yes, Auntie, I said, beaming and going into the shop, while Faiza melted into her surroundings. Where have you been? Asked Gifty when I got inside. I said nothing. Oh, outside, with your Kayayo, of course. She quipped. Silly question. Well, it's my turn to break now that you're back, she said. You deal with the customers for a change. And she walked out of the shop without saying where she was going, holding the door open as the next customer walked in. The Kaya Girl, Chapter 8. The next morning, Gifty turned up in a new pair of tight jeans with a lace-up design all the way up to the side of each leg, a stretchy new t-shirt in a fluorescent orange and spirally orange earrings. It's my birthday, she announced, cracking her chewing gum saucily, and then added, as she saw the look on my face. My mother sent them to me. Anyway, mind your own business. Happy birthday, I said, quite convinced that it was no more her birthday than mine. After serving a few customers, she turned to Auntie. Please, Auntie Lydia, may I go and check if the TV is ready? So that was it, I thought. I knew she was up to something. Okay, agreed Auntie, browsing some Dubai shops that I had googled for her on the internet. She was still confounded if she had clicked in the wrong place and her window disappeared, so she was concentrating on the screen. Gifty was out in a flash. She came back smirking with Stephen in a tow, carrying the TV. Good morning, Mommy. He called cheerfully and winked at me. Abna, help him put it back. She called in our direction. To Gifty's renewed exasperation. This time, however, she refused to be excluded, pushing herself between us and grabbing one end of the TV, as if we could not possibly manage without the assistance of a mosquito like her. I smelled the cheap perfume in which she had clearly doused herself. There was no hope of keeping her out of the conversation this time, but Stephen was not going to let that deter him. So will you give me your friend's phone number? He whispered across to me. I could not help smiling, which infuriated Gifty. I can't do that without her permission, I stalled. Permission? Growled Gifty, dangerously under her breath. Oh, come on, coaxed Stephen, as we hosted the TV on a stand. Gifty flicked the switch, and the TV flashed live. Where's the remote? She asked, impatient to switch one of her telenovelas. Oh no, I forgot it, said Stephen. I looked at him suspiciously. You know what? He continued smoothly, looking pointedly at me rather than Gifty. Why don't you come with me to the shop to collect it? Gifty drew a sharp, audible breath and sensed that he should ask me rather than her, especially after she had been the one to go and fetch him. Okay, I said quickly, before she could intervene. I was not sure how I was going to keep sidestepping his inquiries about Pfizer, but I could not resist such an easy excuse to meet Mike again. Auntie, I'm just going to pick the remote from Mr. Blankson's shop, I said as we walked out. She nodded absently, absorbing Dubai's finery, while popping her snack of mixed popcorn and roasted peanuts into her mouth. I've been trying to find a way to see your friend again, Stephen said when we got outside, as if I hadn't figured it out, but it was so hard to talk in your auntie's shop. Well, he had an uncle too. What about him? I wondered. Stephen was walking very slowly, but I was speeding up because he and I were at different things, and moreover, I did not want to prolong the agony of fending him off Pfizer. I was able to manage until we got to Blankson's, but he refused to fetch me the remote control unless I gave him the number. Where was that uncle? I wondered again, but their shop was much larger than ours and had an office behind it, and their uncle clearly gave them a lot of freedom. After all, they were older and they were boys. They could probably do pretty much as they like as long as the customers were happy, but surely That could not include withholding customers' property from them. Stephen was so genial about it though that I could not be angry, but at the same time, I couldn't very well say, even if I had a phone, you wouldn't need to call her because she's right under your nose. Only you can't see her because she's a poor Kayayo you wouldn't want to go out with anyway. His brother Mike came to my rescue with Charlie. Why they worry my sister like so? Charlie and his brother in Pidgin. Typical secondary school boys, I thought. They all spoke Pidgin among themselves to be cool. I wondered which school they went to. Most likely, one of the boarding ones. They too will soon be gone from Mokola. Hello, Abna, he said to me, remembering my name without hesitation. Nice to see you here again. Nice to see you too, I said, not quite sure where to look, but not wanting to miss too much by looking away either. Coming for your plasma TV? He ripped gently. No, not yet, I laughed. Just coming to pick the remote control for the old one, I said, looking pointedly at his brother. Mike held it out to me with a look at Stephen and said, Charlie, relax. Then he said to me, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Steve and I were wondering if you and your friend would like to join us for an ice cream at Millie's when you finish at the shop. An ice cream at Millie's? I was completely thrown. Millie's was a nice ice cream parlor by the main road, where people sat under umbrellas amid the smog of Mokola and licked at ice cream cones topped with colorful balls that dripped deliciously in the heat. I had been wanting to go there, but had never envisaged it happened this way, with this simultaneously delightful and terrifying invitation. I mean, I like Mike, he clearly liked me, Faisal liked his brother, and he clearly liked her, but 2 plus 2 was just not making 4 here. No, it was making something like 3, an odd and unworkable number for an odd and unworkable situation. Even if Faisal had not melted into an invisible phantom in their world, they were clearly still taking us to be older than we were because of the way we had dressed and behaved that day. I had often been taken to be older than I was, but Faisal in her own everyday attire actually looked younger than her age. And even if we were able to sneak out for ice cream with 2 older boys, what kind of conversation could Faisal possibly have with these 2? Boutique speak would not help her here. They will want girlfriends they could discuss their favorite movies and music with, chat with over the internet, send cute SMS messages to, show off to their friends. An illiterate girl who walked miles with water or firewood or kaya on her head had no place in that world. I did not know what to say. Thanks, that's nice of you, but I don't think my friend is coming to the market today. I finally found my tongue. But you said she comes here all the time, said Stephen, disappointed. Yes, but not today, I said firmly. I needed time to think about this. What about tomorrow then? Mike asked. I looked at him and wished I could find a way to make it work, but I had to keep my wits about me. Okay, you know what? Let me ask her and let you know when she can make it. Alright. That's fair enough, said Mike. But it has to be in the next week, said Stephen. Yes, I know, I said. I mean, we are also going back to school soon. Then I asked, trying to steer the conversation into safer waters. So which school are you 2 at? Motown, Mike said proudly. Ah, that is alma mater, I thought. At Chimotel School. If he was anything like my dad, this topic should prove a rigged diversion. But he bounced the question right back to me. And you? The American school, I replied. Ah, a real dadaba, he smiled and said more eloquently than words could ever have done. Your friend too? Stephen was beginning to ask, but I cut him off hastily and said, I really must be getting back or Auntie will be angry. Poor Auntie, I thought as I walked back. What an ogre I was making her to be to these boys. But my words turned out to be unwittingly prophetic because the moment I entered the shop, I could tell that something was wrong, terribly wrong. Auntie was standing by the desk with her arms akimbo. She pointed at me. "You," she said, as if I were a stranger. "Come here." I walked over on unsteady legs, wondering what she had found out, how much she knew. Then I realized that the cash drawer was standing open. She pointed at it. 50 Ghana cedi is missing. I looked at her, disbelieving. How could she accuse me of stealing? Behind her, Gifty was smirking. The pained look she had worn as I exited the shop with Stephen, now replaced with a triumphant one. I put my hands on my chest to steady my heart. "Auntie Lydia, you think I stole from you?" I asked her, with tears in my voice. "No, silly," she said impatiently. "Why should you steal from me when your parents are much richer than me? No, it's your friend. I mean, that Hausa girl, the Kayayo." I reeled. Faiza was being accused of stealing. And now she was a Hausa girl once again, nothing but a Kayayo. When Auntie had actually called her name, actually spoken to her like a person for the first time, just an hour ago. "Faiza," I said. "You think Faiza will steal from you?" "Why not?" asked Auntie. "She's a poor Kayayo after all. Why wouldn't she take it?" I felt like telling Auntie that being poor did not automatically make people thieves, but I had a feeling it will not help things right now. "Faiza wouldn't do that, Auntie," I said instead. "I know she wouldn't. Please believe me. But I hear you've been bringing her into the shop." She fired back with an accusatory flourish of her hand. She was watching me keenly. So was Gifty. Traitor. I should have known it had been too much of a risk to take. But we had been having so much fun. I had just let myself get carried away and had carelessly brushed aside her jealousy, which had been growing steadily, fueled by her outrage that the boy she liked preferred a lowly Kayayo. And I had broken Auntie's rules. I could not deny that. Now, I was paying for the price of all these follies combined. Gifty stared brazenly back at me, as if she had nothing to hide. "Auntie, I'm sorry," I pleaded. "I shouldn't have done that behind your back." She nodded sternly. "But you know, Faiza," I continued, imploringly. "You know, she wouldn't do that." Auntie stared at me silently, unmoved. "She wouldn't, I tell you. She would never steal it." And then I faltered, remembering the time she had stolen money from her own auntie. My auntie was observing me intently. I tried to cover up, but it was too late. "You see, you're not even sure yourself," she said triumphantly. "You are her friend, but even you can't trust her." But that was different. I said to myself, she had done it to help a cousin, to rescue her. Was all stealing the same? Was all stealing bad? I had never had to think about such things before, and this was not the time to be unsure of myself. My hesitation had already caused too much. Auntie flung open the door of the shop and went outside. She came back with Faiza. "You, this girl," she said, pointing at her the way she had earlier pointed at me. "I've not brought you into the shop, and you couldn't resist helping yourself to the money." Faiza looked shocked, bewildered. "No, Madam Lydia," she said, addressing her by the name for the first time. "No, never." She looked over at me, and I looked back, mortified. Tears started to roll down my cheeks. Auntie addressed the two of us. "This is what I get for allowing my niece to befriend a common Kayayo. Ungrateful creature. Get out of my shop. I don't want to see you hanging around here anymore. Do you hear?" Faiza appealed to her again. "Please, madam, I can never do such a thing. I did not take your money. I swear it." Auntie responded by stamping her foot, as if shooing a dog or cat. I said, "Get out! Get out of my sight before I call the police." Auntie Omotola emerged from her shop and hurried toward us. She had heard Auntie raise her voice and wanted to find out what was wrong. Faiza looked at me, and I looked back with helplessness in my eyes. I didn't know what to say or do. I knew she hadn't taken the money, but I didn't know how to defend her. She turned and ran away. I burst into tears. My feelings were jumbled, and I didn't know what to do. I felt bewildered, as if the world I had known had suddenly disappeared, stranding me in an alien place. I also felt humiliated and angry. Angry with Auntie, angry with Gifty, but above all, furious with myself that I had brought all this about and had not been able to defend Faiza better. My guilt at going behind Auntie's back to bring Faiza into the shop made it difficult for me to stand up for myself or her, but I should have been able to somehow. Anyway, I didn't know how, but that was how I felt as I stood there by the door of the shop with tears running down my cheek. Auntie Omo looked from one face to another in deep distress. She did not know what had happened between all of us, but she could tell it was bad and she felt helpless. I looked at Gifty once again, but this time she couldn't look back at me. She turned away. I ran out of the shop, not heeding Auntie's call, looking for Faiza, but with a small head start, she had disappeared. I turned, in which direction I hardly knew, searching for her anywhere, everywhere, in shops, at food stalls, in all the places we had been together, but I couldn't find her. I looked and looked for what seemed like hours, and probably were, but she truly had disappeared as effectively as she always did, into her surroundings. And although I was always the one who could find her, this time she was invincible to me too. I trudged all around the vast market until my feet hurt and I was sweating and tired. I still couldn't find her, but I didn't feel like going back to the shop. I couldn't face Auntie. I couldn't stand to look at Gifty, and I couldn't face myself. I felt as if I wanted to run away from myself. Finally, unable to walk another step, I came to a stop at the back of a wholesale shop where I sat on a little covert among empty cartons and crates, almost hidden by them. I hardly noticed the stench from the drain. I just sat staring into space, feeling like Asana must have felt when she had wished herself away from a situation that she couldn't face. I knew I wasn't going to find Faiza, and I knew I'll probably never see her again. I never imagined that we would say goodbye, or rather, not say goodbye, in such a manner. I bent over, folded my arms, and hid my head in my lap, shutting out the world. I had no idea how long I sat there like that, but eventually, someone tapped me on the elbow. I looked up to see the owner of the store. They were locking up and had spotted me outside among the boxes. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Are you sick?" I dozed off, spent. "Oh no, I'm fine," I said mechanically, disoriented and feeling far from fine. I had not eaten since morning, but I could not call the yawning feeling in my stomach hunger because I had no appetite, and it just blended with all the other things yawning at me. I looked at my watch. It was time to go. Auntie was wondering where I was. She looked at me as I entered the shop with a look that was not devoid of sympathy, but she did not ask me anything. I could tell she had been worried and was relieved I was back, but had decided not to scold, perhaps because of the pathetic figure I cut. This time, there was no Faiza to accompany us to the car park with Auntie's laptop bag slack over her small shoulders. As the car moved through the darkening street, I stared out of the window, unseeing, unthinking. I wondered if somewhere Faiza was also staring out of a darkening window as the street receded behind her. The Kaya Girl, Chapter 9. I went back home the following day. I was supposed to have stayed with Auntie a few days more, but I had a fever and my head hurt and she wanted to hand me over to my father before it got any worse. It was a relief for everyone. I didn't want to be with her or Gifty anymore, and I didn't feel like going back to Makola ever again. Daddy was still busy at the clinic, and Mommy was due back in a few days with my new baby brother, but I was happy to be left alone in the house for most of the day. Daddy took me to his clinic for a blood test and gave me medicine and told me to stay in bed. The house help took care of me, and he came back from the clinic during his lunch breaks and closed early to come home and see his most important patient, as he called me. I would sleep and watch cable TV all day, needing to escape from my own thoughts. My fever was gone after 2 days, but my appetite was still not back, and Daddy looked at me with a frown that evening. "Abi, is anything bothering you? I expected you to be more, perky by now." I looked away, and he could see that he was right. "What is it, dearest?" he asked with a renewed concern. "You can tell me." I looked at the worry in his eyes. Yes, I'll tell him, I thought. Otherwise, he might fear something even worse, and I had always been able to tell him things that many girls could not discuss with their fathers. "Daddy, I lost a friend," I began, and tears came into my eyes. "What?" he asked in alarm. "Who? Surely, you don't mean—" "No, nobody died," I said, thinking to myself that it was not only people who could die. I told him all about Faiza. "She was a Kayayo," I said, "in Makola Market." "You made friends with a Kayayo?" he asked wondrously. "Yes," I said, looking down. I waited for his disapproval, but he didn't come. "That's amazing, Abna," he said instead. "Tell me more." He actually sounded excited. "Well, Dad," I said, "she was just the most amazing girl." "Really? What did you like about her?" he asked. "Well, she never pretended to be anything she wasn't. And she was so smart, Dad, you wouldn't have believed it." "Oh yes, I would," he said. "And she was fun." I finished off. "So much fun. She had this great big smile and would say haba or woy, and she was always out for trying new things, learning new things, and she was just my kind of person." Dad lifted my chin with his finger. "You know, Abna, I'm proud of you," he said to my surprise. "A lot of children in your shoes would think they were too good to be friends with a Kayayo." I understood what he meant, but oddly, when I thought about it, I almost felt as if Faiza had been too good for me. It was one of the many feelings I had with regards to her, which seemed to be the wrong way round when you look at them in a normal world. "Dad, why is it that people here are not interested in the North?" I asked. He replied. "I know what you mean, but the North is a fascinating place." "Oh, have you been?" I asked. "Oh yes," he replied. "I even worked there once." "What?" I exclaimed. "You never told me that." "Well, you never asked, did you?" he replied, and added in a teasing tone, "You little Southerner." Indeed, I reflected. I had hardly ever thought or heard about the North till I met Faiza. "It was a long time ago," continued Dad, "before you were born. I was a new doctor, and I was posted to the Tamale General Hospital for a couple of years." "Wow." "Yes, it was even before I met your mother. So what was it like?" "Well, it was challenging working there at that time. They didn't have a lot of facilities, but I had to make the most of it, and I had a lot of responsibilities, even though I was young, because they were always short of doctors up there." "Really?" I said. "But I really enjoyed living there. Although it was hard in many ways, it was also very interesting to observe totally different cultures and lifestyle from ours, and I found the people so warm and hospitable. I loved their food. I made friends at work, and they took me to their homes at weekends, and their mothers and wife cooked for me, and I loved it, especially TZ. You know, Tunzafi. I smiled. I liked it too, Dad. I said eagerly. Pfizer introduced me to it at the market. He smiled back. It's great, isn't it? Especially with granite soup, full of green leaves. What a difference this was from Auntie, I thought. She would turn up her nose at Hausa food. I wish I could have spoken to Dad about this a long time ago. And I wish I could have told Pfizer that my dad had lived in the north. It was very hot up there though, he continued. That took a bit of getting used to. Yes, Pfizer told me it was hot, I said. So, and he took my hand and asked gently, what happened with Pfizer? Dad, I was naughty once and brought her into Auntie's shop when Auntie was out. I wanted to show her the internet. Oh yes, I'm sure she liked that. Oh, you should have seen and heard her, Dad. But a couple of days later, some money went missing from the shop. Gifty told Auntie that I had brought Pfizer into the shop, and Auntie blamed it on her. Oh dear, well, you know you shouldn't have broken your auntie's rules. Don't you, Abna? Yes, Dad, I know, I replied. That was bad of me, and I apologized. But Dad, I know she didn't take the money. Auntie was acting as if she must have taken it just because she was poor. But I know, no matter how hard things were for her, she wouldn't have done such a thing. I believe you, he said straight away. How easy it was with him, I thought once again. But Auntie didn't, I said. She sacked her from the shop. She disgraced her. It was awful. I didn't know what to do. Tears rolled down my cheek once again. I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. Daddy held me, and I sobbed into his shoulder. I'm sorry, sweetie, he said, patting my back. I'm sure it was all a dreadful misunderstanding. Would you like me to speak to your auntie? I don't know. I hiccuped. She was so angry, and it was all so dreadful. Okay, you know what? Ask Daddy. Let's just give a little time, and then you can think of what to do. No rush. I nodded and lay my head on his shoulder again. It was so comforting. I didn't wish myself away anymore. This was where I wanted to be. I wondered if Pfizer had anyone to comfort her. You know, Abna, Dad continued, people make all sorts of assumptions about poor people. Sometimes, it's almost as if they see them as a different species. I nodded into his shoulder. I was calm and drowsy now, and just wanted to listen to him talk. Sometimes, I feel as if I have lived two lives, being two people, the poor boy from the village and the successful doctor and world expert in tropical medicine. The poor boy from the village. Now, I did need to talk. I had never known that about my dad. Oh yes, I was born in the village, just like your friend. My father abandoned my mom, so we were very poor. We wore rags and didn't have enough food to fill our bellies. But we worked hard on our farm, and my mother saw that I was an inquisitive boy who asked a lot of questions, so she begged her brother to take me and send me to school. Fortunately, he did so, and I did well, so much so that I eventually won a scholarship and ended up going to the university to study medicine. Dad, I said, seeing him in new light, how wonderful, good for you. I knew my dad had relatives in the village, but I never realized he was born and raised there himself in poverty too. He just seemed too polished and cosmopolitan. It was hard to believe, and especially for someone like me, who was born right into the fruits of his labor. It was difficult to imagine the courage and the spirit that had led him to transition between two worlds. But then, I knew someone else with such a spirit. Don't ever let anyone make you feel bad for befriending a village girl, he concluded, because, remember, your father is a village boy too. I was on my feet to greet Mommy and my little brother when they arrived the next day. He was adorable, all baby sounds and smells. I couldn't put him down and was sorry I had to go back to school on Monday. I had wanted a brother or sister for years, but Mommy had suffered from poor health due to asthma and had grown used to being the only child. She was amazed by how much I had grown over the holidays. We are 2 women in the house now, she said. She asked how things had gone with Auntie Lydia, and I said fine. I didn't want to bother her with the Pfizer issue, now that she needed to settle back home with little Kwesi. There will be time for that later. It was good to be back in school. All the busyness, all the familiar people, all the routines. Makwala now seemed worlds away, and the trauma of the last day there was dissipating. But what never left my memory was Pfizer herself. As I reunited with my friends, it struck me each time how missing something was from our interactions, and how I had never noticed it was missing before I'd met Pfizer. My friends were fun, and they shared my space and my daily life, but there was no one with whom I had the kind of bond I had had with her. In our first English lesson, Miss Faraday told us to talk about what we had done during our summer holidays. Many of my classmates had been abroad. Helena Owusu talked about shopping with her mother in Oxford Street, not the Osu version, the one in London. Alex Ampofo talked about some huge aquarium in Dubai, and especially about the sharks. The American and other foreign children had been back home or to exotic holiday locations all around the world. When I said I had spent the holiday with my aunt at Makwala Market, there was a few giggles, but I didn't care. I had been abroad for holidays many times before, but this vacation at Makwala had been one of the most memorable in my life. I knew that hardly anyone in my class would have been to Makwala, not even the Ghanaian children, so I described it in detail, and Miss Faraday nodded delightedly. So can you get huge squimmy snails there? Alex Ampofo asked gleefully. I told them about the traditional medicine section, where you could get dried chameleons and other weird and wonderful things. I knew Alex and his cronies would soon be visiting Makwala. The girls were interested to hear about my auntie's shop and about all the fabrics and clothing and makeup one could buy in the markets, so much cheaper than in the shops of Osu and cantonments. One of the things Miss Faraday wanted us to mention and had listed on the blackboard was new people you met. So I told them about Pfizer. I knew they would not understand the word Kayayo, so I tried to find another way to put it. She was a Kaya girl, I said. A Kaya girl? Miss Faraday asked, sounding the R with her American accent, while several of my classmates echoed my own question from 2 months ago. A Kaya what? I explained to them what Kayayo was and talked a bit about the North, the things I had learned from Pfizer, and the life of girls like her in the city markets. It was so different from everyone else's account of the holidays that they all listened quietly, and when I was done, Miss Faraday thanked me for teaching us all so many new things about the country in which we lived. For homework, she asked us to write an essay based on our discussion in the class that morning on the best things about our summer vacation. I wrote my essay that evening. In it, I described Makwala Market and how Pfizer and I met. I wrote about her work and our unusual friendship and how she had taught me about her home and introduced me to their food right there in Makwala. I also wrote about the things I had taught her, how fascinated she was by the internet, and how hard it had been to convince her that the earth moved around the sun. I said how smart she was, and how sad it was that she could not go to school. When I was done, I read it over, and I was pleased with it. Now, I had to think of a title. I pondered for a minute. Then I wrote in bold letters at the top, The Kaya Girl. The Kaya Girl, Chapter 10. Miss Faraday gave us our aces back on Friday. I had received the highest mark in the class for the Kaya Girl. I showed it to Dad that evening, and he was delighted. He asked me to read it out. I waited till Mom had finished feeding little Chrissy and put him to bed, and then I read it out to both of them. They clapped and heaped me with praise. Mommy was thrilled that the vacation had turned out so well for me, because it was not with apprehension that she sent me to Auntie Lydia. I thought it was time for me to tell her what had happened though, because I knew she would hear it from Auntie sooner or later, and I wanted to have the chance to tell her my side of the story. This time, it was not so raw, and there were no tears when I talked about it, which was a relief because I did not want to alarm her. She had enough crying on her hands with the baby. I'm really sorry you went through all that, Abna, she said. Like that, she told me I had been wrong to go behind Auntie's back, but she believed me when I said that Pfizer was innocent. So who do you think took the money? She asked. I have no idea, Mummy, I said. This was not strictly true, and I didn't understand why I said it. The truth was, there was no doubt in my mind that Gifty had taken it. In a subconscious way, I had always known it from the beginning, but in the past week, I had had a lot of time to think about it, and it had all fallen into place. That afternoon, when Auntie had been chatting with us outside the shop and had actually been nice to Pfizer for the first time, Gifty had been alone in there for a few minutes. Plenty of time to take 50 Ghana cedis out of the drawer. Then, as soon as I had gone back inside, she had gone out, telling me it's my turn to look after the customers for a change. She had not said where she was going, but now I was sure she had gone shopping with the money. Then, she had turned up the following morning in a showy new outfit, claiming it was her birthday. Then, she had convinced Auntie to let her go to the Blanksons. It was so clear now. It had all been a scheme to impress Stephen, whom she had fallen for at first sight. And she was all determined to get her claws on him because she knew he had a crush on Pfizer, which choked her with jealousy. Already, she was jealous of the girl because I had shown a preference for her. But when Stephen did too, that was just too much. And when, despite her best efforts, Stephen barely noticed her and was still asking for Pfizer, she had to do something about it. Something to put that Kayayo in a place once and for all. I still remember the look she had given me as Stephen and I left together for Blanksons. As soon as we were gone, she would have cooked up an excuse to get Auntie to notice the theft and then told her that I had brought Pfizer into the shop, knowing that this could only mean one thing to Auntie, and thereby exacting a neat revenge on both of us. She knew Auntie would rather blame a poor Kayayo from the north than her own relative, and she also knew that it would be difficult for me to stand up to Auntie when I was in the wrong for bringing Pfizer into the shop. She held all the cards, Gifty did, and I had played right into her hands. She was clever than I had ever given her credit for. I thought bitterly, but it was the wrong kind of clever. And yet, I had not said anything to anyone about all this. It seemed absurd to shield her when she had done this to me. Thus, to us. But despite my distaste for her method and manipulation, I felt an odd kind of sympathy for her. She had always irritated me with her wannabe ways, but at the same time, it always made me pity her that she could not just be comfortable in her own skin, that she needed to be something else to feel legitimized in other people's eyes. And on a deeper level, I realized that this was probably what she had envied most about Pfizer, that she was so comfortable with who she was, no matter how lowly people considered her to be. And that was the root of her confidence, even when faced with people who felt they were better than her. I had also envied things about Faiza, had even told her so on several occasions. Thus, her strength, her courage in adversity. But envy could be such different things. One could admire a quality in another and love them for it, and aspire to emulate them, rather than hating them for possessing what one did not. I pitied Gipsy for hating rather than loving, and when I thought about it in later years, I knew there must be reasons why she was that way. Perhaps difficult things she had been through that I knew nothing about. That was why I could not betray her, as she had betrayed me and Pfizer. But that day when my mother asked me about it, I didn't understand why I covered up for her. I just did. You know, Mommy, it could even have been a customer who took the money. I said, you should advise Auntie Lydia to get a cash till. That drawer she keeps the money in is just not safe. Yes, you're right, darling, she said. Such things are not unheard of. That's why many people have cameras in their shop these days. I should suggest that to her too. I smiled. I knew my auntie, and a cash till would be plenty to start with. After I got ready for bed that night, I read my essay again. It was not just the pride of having topped the class, it was because it had captured many of the memories of the special time. There was so much left out too, I reflected. Things I did not want to share with the class, like the story of Asana and Alhaji Brown Seed. I'll find further adventure in the market, Gifty and Imaginations, Stephen and Mike, aka Peter and Paul, and the real spirit and treasure of our friendship. I decided to write it all over again, the full and unexpurgated version. I owed it to myself and to Pfizer to put down a true record of our friendship and our adventures together, and to commit to writing all the little details I never wanted to forget. I reached for my diary and then thought better of it. This was not just a diary entry. This was a story. I opened the lower drawer of my night table and took out a pretty notebook bound in sky blue cloth with a lock and key. It had been a Christmas present from Mom, but I had not yet used it. Now, I removed the key from the lock where it was tapped and opened the book. It had white, faintly lined pages and smelled crisp and fresh. It would take me many entries to write a story, but I started that evening, and the first thing I did was to write on the fly leaf in bold letters once again, the Kaya girl. As I lay in bed, I thought about my dear friend and wondered where she was now, what she might be doing. Had she made it safely to Kumasi? Was she busy carrying things in a big bowl for rich Ashanti customers? Had she found any friends? Had she found her sister, cousin, Asana? Asana, I thought. Now I knew the kind of pain Pfizer must have felt to see her go so suddenly, without even having a chance to say a proper goodbye. I knew what it must have felt like not to know where she was, or how to get back in touch with her, or if she could ever see her again. How, in this day and age, I wondered yet again, could I have lost touch so oddly and completely with someone who mattered so much? I imagined looking at Pfizer in KJTM Market, a minute, self-efficacious figure amid a churning bustle of thousands. I thought of going to the north to find her. I could not even remember the name of her village, with all the consonant and throaty sounds. No, all I had left of her were my memories, and her name. Her name, I suddenly thought. Faiza, what did it mean anyway? I had never thought of that when she was right there in front of me. Never thought to ask. But now that it was one of the few things I had to hold on to, I felt an urgent need to know. I got out from bed, switched my laptop, plugged in the internet, and Googled Pfizer. I had no idea if it would come up with anything, but it was worth a try. Cool, I thought as the entry page loaded. There were several entries for it. I clicked. Faiza is a female Arabic name, meaning winner, successful woman, and victorious. I read out under my breath. Yes, I cheered, feeling elated. Faiza might be a poor Kayayo, but there was nothing poor about her spirit. She was strong, plunky, and ready to fight for what she wanted and what she considered right. She once told me that the thing that stopped most people in this world from doing what they really wanted was fear. But like all bullies, fear is a coward, she said. It can only stop you until you stand up to it. I felt oddly comforted and at the same time vindicated because I had believed in her all along. I had no idea what fate had in store for her, but finding out what her name meant had only strengthened my faith in her. Winner, victorious, I read again. It seemed almost prophetic.